Hey everybody, this is Jordan Peterson, and I will be presenting the art and cultural policy of Estonia. And if you're like me, there was one point where I did have to Google a map of Europe just to make sure I knew where it was. My husband and I have been there before, but if you haven't ever heard of it or you're unfamiliar with its history or culture, here is a little bit of background. Estonia is nestled right next to Russia, and it is known as part of the Baltic states. There's 3 countries that make up those Baltic nations, or Baltic republics as they're sometimes referred to, and it's Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And although Estonia is a fairly small country, it's home to approximately 1.3 million people. Many languages are spoken in Estonia, including Estonian, Russian, Ukrainian, English, Finnish, German, and others. According to the census of 2000, there was over 109 languages that were spoken natively in Estonia. And as we continue through this presentation, we'll discuss a little bit about how the culture of Estonia affects the art policies and other things associated with that. During the 20th century, Estonia experienced several crises and arrived at several junctures in its development. These included the creation of an independent state in 1918, 2 occupations during the Second World War, and the destruction of social structures by the Soviet regime. And there were many countries in Europe that were experiencing a little bit of this same wartime effects on their countries, and we'll discuss a little bit how that also plays a role in its history and cultural policy. In culture, life, and cultural policies, as well as in many other fields of politics, a distancing from patterns of the Soviet regime began in 1988 when representatives of the cultural field voiced their views for the first time in public against environmental and nationality problems. That year also marked the beginning of several organizational changes in the administration of cultural policy in Estonia. Much of my research noted that Estonia is still very much a society in transition. It's still establishing its political and economic systems. It's still a very unique country in Europe, and it's haunted a lot by the legacy of that Soviet indoctrination and education and control, and affecting, not least the cultural sector. As I've done some research and looked a little bit deeper into those that have really studied the culture of this Estonian country, it's noted quite often that Estonia is still culturally one of the most unique countries in Europe. And under examination, it was clear that the arts and cultural and related public policies could not be treated as separate sector undergoing its own transformational process. On the Estonian Republic website, it notes that the national cultural policy follows the obligations stemming from our Constitution to maintain the Estonian nation and its culture. Thus, its main objective is to preserve our cultural traditions. Next to the Estonian traditions, our cultural policy is aimed at supporting the cultural autonomy of ethnic minorities living in Estonia. The cultural policy is also intended to maintain vitality in all spheres of both professional and folk cultures. And as we move forward, we'll discuss a little bit more about the arts and how they really do have a focus and support for all of that inside the country. As we shift over to look at the arts in Estonia, according to the Ministry of Culture website, which is a sector of the Republic of Estonia information page, we see that the Estonian art scene is thriving. Broad-based exhibition activities at home and the activity of Estonian artists and curators internationally combine to form the face of their contemporary arts, which is quite large. The art scene is comprised mainly of freelance artists as well as self-organized and private institutions. There are no central state organizations, which I did find interesting. There are a large number of regional initiatives and providers of professional support services that have helped to create an art scene that is diverse and filled with opportunities. Looking further into the fundamentals of cultural policy, the development of art policies is based on a document called the Fundamentals of Art Policy until 2020. These policies include finance, exhibitions, internationalism, artwork acts, art publication, and education. The main source of financing is the Cultural Endowment of Estonia, which budgets 1/3 of its annual budget for visual and applied arts endowment, which ends up being approximately £599,797, which in US dollars is approximately $692,863.73. As of 2017, the Gallery of Estonian Artists Association and the Contemporary Art Museum of Estonia will also receive partial operating subsidies. As of 2016, with grants from the Ministry of Culture, the Estonian Artists Association is paying salaries for 3 years to 8 art professionals. Looking at exhibitions, the Ministry of Culture website notes that a total of 717 art exhibitions were organized at 75 exhibition venues. 104 of the exhibitions also included foreign artists and curators in 2016. The largest exhibition venues besides the State Art Museum are the Tallinn Art Hall, Tartu Art House, Contemporary Art Museum of Estonia, the galleries of the Estonian Artists Association, the city galleries in the county centers, and the galleries of the institutions of art education. The activities being organized in self-organized project space is also forcefully impacting the exhibition scene. Exhibitions are the central part of the activities in private galleries. The growing number of residencies is having a noticeable impact on the organization of exhibitions. Looking now at internationalization, which I'm almost positive earlier I said was internationalism, I learned that since 1997, Estonia has continually participated in the Venice Art Biennale. The Estonian Pavilion is organized by the Center for Contemporary Arts, Estonia, and in 2017, Katja Novosko's project, If You Could Only See What I've Seen With Your Eyes, will be exhibited. In 2016, Estonian artists were represented at 75 exhibitions or art events abroad. A total of 90 artists or groups participated. Currently, 15 Estonian artists are being actively represented by galleries operating in the international art market. I found this pretty interesting because Estonia is such a small country and a lot of people don't know that it exists at all, and if they do, they don't know much about it. And because there's such a large support for the arts and a cultural policy in play that can keep them progressing, it's interesting that there are so many artists that are being represented on the international art market, and that there are so many exhibitions happening abroad with these participating artists. Moving now, as we look at Artwork Acts and the Commissioning of Artwork Act, in 2011, the Commissioning of the Artworks Act came into force in Estonia in order to bring more art into the public space. The law establishes the principle that an indivisible part of the construction of a public building is the commissioning of artwork for that building. In this way, the public space is aesthetically enriched. Similar projects for commissioning works of art have been organized in the rest of the world for decades. So this was one of those times where I felt like I could really see the catch-up work that Estonia was doing as they were still kind of in that transition that we talked about, as they're establishing political and economic systems and really just coming out from under the cloud that was that Soviet regime. So this was something that I found really interesting, that as buildings are being commissioned, that artwork is being commissioned kind of in tandem with that. Looking at art publications, there's an art quarterly that is published by this foundation that I cannot pronounce because it's in Estonian, but it is the only Estonian language art and visual cultural magazine that covers the various aspects of the Estonian contemporary art scene and visual culture. And then twice a year, the Estonian Institute publishes this magazine in the English and Estonian language. Academic art history is advanced on the pages of the peer-reviewed journal called the Studies on Art and Architecture, and there are art reviews that appear regularly in this newspaper. Art criticism is also fostered by various other initiatives, including certain blogs and other avenues. Doing some research on this Ministry of Culture website, as far as education goes, was something that was really interesting to me, just because I feel like that's where a lot of us are currently, is we're utilizing, our passion and our accessibility to art to further our education. And it was interesting to read kind of what is offered in a country like Estonia. And it notes that a higher education can be acquired at the Estonian Academy of Arts, Tartu Art College, University of Tartu, Tallinn University, and Estonian Academy of Music and Theater. There's also an MA in art management. So if we fail this program, we can always check that out. Just kidding. But the Tartu Art School provides art-related vocational education. And in the field of extracurricular education, art schools, along with music schools, are the most numerous. In Estonia, there are 44 schools providing extracurricular education that includes art classes. So they get a giant high five for incorporating art into that curriculum. And if you jump on this website, if you're interested at all, I'll link that in my works cited, but there's a list of kind of main partners and everybody who helps implement this education and provide this. And there is just lists and lists of all of these organizations, venues and development centers and associations that are working to keep art education functioning and available to those that are interested and looking for it. Although things in Estonia are very much progressing and moving forward as far as cultural policy and art advocacy and accessibility, there were definitely problems that were faced. And looking back at the Baltic states being under that Soviet rule from 1944 until 91, the independence wasn't regained for quite some time, which really affected the way that the whole country has continued to grow out from underneath that Soviet rule. They faced issues of national identity, of cultural survival, and even just permission to be behind as far as everything goes. There's a wonderful book called The Art of the Baltics, The Struggle for Freedom of Artistic Expression Under the Soviets from 1945 to 1991, and that's by Jane Voorhees. And there's a lot of things I want to touch on from this book, talking about identity and openness, and I think that the way that she's put together this information really helps people understand kind of where these people and this culture of Estonia is trying to find itself. It talks about at the core of the stormy development of arts in recent years lies the issue of national identity. Estonians have emerged from domination by the Soviet Union, a large, closed system that used its power to attempt to destroy Estonia's identity. And that very first statement, as you read this book, is really powerful. That's very impactful, thinking that they were just trying to completely obliterate the identity of this Estonian country and culture. And as a reaction against the oppression, people fervently sought to preserve national identity during that Soviet occupation. The sudden jump into the free world after establishing independence has raised serious questions concerning Estonia's ability to preserve its identity and original culture, because for so long it was trying to be erased. Estonia's ability to preserve its identity and original culture, for a long time they lacked the experience of open communication with the world. They were so oppressed, and now they are trying to kind of overcome all these difficulties at once. Once they were gained its independence in 91, and for a long time the rapid computerization and integration into a communication network without geographic landmarks raises serious questions of survival for small cultures that base their national identity on their language and cultural traditions. And so she discusses, on one hand, that Estonia as a state wished to become integrated into international policy structures, yet on the other hand, The previously established rules of those structures required that Estonia modify and transform its identity to fit certain structures. And the same applies in the cultural sphere, that Estonians are doing all they can to speak up in the international arena without losing the originality of their voices that they worked so hard to gain. And in the 90s, with all the problems that the Western artists attempt to deal with, violence, sexuality, drugs, death, they kind of slowly made their way into Estonian art, where local club culture and MTV and X and E generations have emerged, and critics are writing it off as trendy art, yet they're not overly critical of it. And they almost have an attitude of permission that has prevailed, letting artists try everything as long as they develop. And that's where this kind of permission to be behind is given to Estonia, because for so long they were so oppressed and cut off from the rest of the world as this Soviet rule tried to squash out basically their national identity and culture. So Estonian art at the beginning of the 21st century faced the same problems that art in the rest of Europe faced. And during that Soviet era, artists could avoid unpleasant issues and remain apart from the rest of the world. And in this age of globalization, such isolation is almost impossible now. And Estonians have lately become aware that a neutral aesthetic object of fine art no longer exists. And this realization may open up unique prospects of art in Estonia. And art in Estonia has not been guilty of attempting to change itself or its society. And Estonian artists now have the opportunity to start with a clean canvas, now that they have kind of really gained their bearings as far as cultural policy progression and the incorporation and integration of art. And I think that because of its really storied and hard past, that Estonia is going to continue to really have to work to keep from falling back on feelings of resentment, and making sure that their cultural survival stays at the forefront of their kind of endeavors to keep art progressive and continuing forward. So, let's clear it up. I keep discussing this ministry culture of Estonia, and this is where I found most of my information, so I wanted to just quickly clarify kind of what I'm speaking about. So this Ministry of Culture of Estonia is a governmental agency in Estonia in charge of conducting and organizing the country's cultural affairs and policies. So it's headed by the minister, who interacts with undersecretaries of fine arts, and they are responsible for a whole list of things, from theater to museums to broadcasting and audiovisual policy, copyright and neighboring rights, sports. So there's a whole list of things that they are responsible for. So when I've mentioned the Ministry of Culture of Estonia, this is what I'm discussing, and these are the people who I am mentioning as far as providing this support and information surrounding these governmental policies. Another thing to quickly clear up is this Estonian Socialist Soviet Republic. So just because it played such a large role in how this country has molded itself and adapted and changed, so this Socialist Soviet Republic, also known as Soviet Estonia or Estonia, was a republic of the Soviet Union administered by a subordinate of the government of the Soviet Union. So the ESSR was initially established on the territory of the Republic of Estonia on July 21st, 1940, following the invasion of the Soviet troops on June 17th, 1940. And the installation of a puppet government backed by the Soviet Union, which declared Estonia a Soviet state. So if you're feeling so inclined, you can go do a little bit of research on a puppet government, and that might give you some more information to kind of back the relationship that the Soviet Republic had with kind of the Estonia that we know today. And the Estonian SSR was subsequently incorporated into the USSR on August 9th, 1940, and the territory was occupied by Nazi Germany from 41 to 44. So that's something that I also found interesting as I was doing my research, that I had read so much about the occupation of the Nazis throughout Europe, but I didn't realize that they were also making an impact on Estonia as part of this Republic of the Soviet Union. So, hopefully, we have a little bit of a better grasp on the cultural and art policy of Estonia. Thanks for getting through this with me. I apologize that there are some obvious bumbles throughout this, but this is something that I really enjoyed researching, and if any of you, I'm sure all of you, in fact, have done the research on your countries, if you're interested in looking for more information surrounding any of these Baltic countries, I have a whole slew of information that I'm willing to provide and some awesome links. I'll list my works cited page here shortly, and you're welcome to follow up with any of those links and ask any questions concerning any of that information. Thanks.